Well, a lot of it is just in the blood, and I was thinking about this recently and kind of trying to track my own earliest interest in technology. And as I was growing up in Bloomington, Indiana, long ago, there was a neighbor who had a wire recorder. I'm not sure you know there were such things, but before there were tape recorders, they recorded on wire. And I used to go over and watch this amazing machine that would record your voice. And he actually got something else and gave it to me when I was 10 or 11 years old. And it was just an example of how fascinated I was early on by technology. When I was in my teens, I wanted to buy my own tape recorder. And as I recall, it was about $150 at a time when that would be well over $1,000 today. And for a couple of years, I just saved money from Christmas, birthdays, little odd jobs to buy this portable 45-pound tape recorder. And so for me to kind of watch some of these things become more and more available has been wonderful. And a good case in point, when I first came to Eastern in 1972, I was already interested in using film in the classroom. Now in those days, you probably know it was 16 millimeter film, the projector. You'd have to rent the film, have it shipped in 3 months in advance, line up the projector and the projectionist, and halfway through any film there was that kind of soul-destroying as the film broke, and then there'd be an awkward 10 minutes while they got the film going again, and off it would go. But it was film, and it was exciting. It was a variety, and the first two scholarly projects or research projects, publications I did at Eastern shortly after graduate school, were to write 2 articles for a magazine called The History Teacher, one on film and history in general, and the other on films on the American Revolution, because we were coming up on the bicentennial. And for a couple of months I had, if you'd go into my office, there was a stack of films, probably 4 feet high, these big film boxes that people sent in for my doing both of those articles. So there again, it was sort of an early example of being fascinated by film. But one of the things I've found just tremendously gratifying in academic life in the last 10 years, it's probably not been much more than that, the way that the new technology has kicked in for classroom use. Of course, email was available before that and a little bit on the web. But to be able to take a film clip and to present it in the classroom, that's an incredibly exciting thing for somebody who for years had watched Hollywood movies and thought, oh, I wish I could have the way they present the Battle of Yorktown and bring it into the classroom. Pretty much impossible in those earlier days. But in the last 10 years in particular, the software for getting the films, taking clips out of films, the smart classrooms where you can put the film on a big projector. When I first came, we were just using little TV screens for the films. So it's something, I was longing for all of this stuff long before it arrived. And it seems to me, particularly the last 3-4 years, have just put all of the pieces together, something like editing my own films with iMovie, which I couldn't have conceived of doing just a few years ago. So it's partly an enthusiasm for what keeps coming along, but it was also an enthusiasm that was there way back in the days of the wire recorder. Well, there's no single answer to that, but a number of stories that I'd like to tell you that I think illustrate that, and just examples of what I do. For one thing, I do my best to learn student names, and class of 25, I can usually do it pretty easily. 50, it gets harder. 110, really hard. I've never done it, gotten them all. But in the early days when I arrived at Eastern, I had a Polaroid camera, and I'd line up people and take Polaroid shots of them, photocopy the Polaroid, cut out the pictures, put them over the names, and it was pretty laborious, and it was just black and white, but it helped. But nowadays, I'll go into the, may I demonstrate here?
Sure.
Show and tell. Currently, I'm using this camera, which is a Canon, what do they call it? A power shot. And it's good enough that I can go around and take pictures of people, make a movie I have them tell their names, and then I can, actually I've got the movie now on my computer, but also in my iPhone. So at random points I can just pull it out and work on learning the names. So that would be one way. Movies, I do a lot with movies. As I indicated before, taking films, documentaries, and Hollywood type movies using clips in the classroom. But I'm beginning to get more and more involved in taking my own movies and incorporating them. Now, I've yet to manage to raise the funds to recreate a Civil War battle or something like that. But I do have, of course, the Hollywood movies and the documentaries take care of that. But I like to visit sites and take pictures. Good case in point, you know, a lot of our students at Eastern, if they tell you they've been east, they might mean they got across the Montana border. Now, obviously, some got all the way to the East Coast, but for quite a few of my students, I can't assume they know the terrain of the East. And a few years ago, I was having them read a book about Washington's crossing the Delaware, which is one of the iconic moments of the American Revolution. He was basically down to 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers fighting the British Empire, and there's no way he should have been able to win. But he crossed the Delaware in the night and surprised the British Hessian soldiers nearby, won a victory that really, momentum-wise, turned the tables on the British. And crossing the Delaware, it's a river. And the students had read a book about this, and we had a film that reenacts it. But I was back in Pennsylvania, went down to the site, took a movie on a Monday, probably Monday morning, because later that day I boarded a plane and came back to Cheney. So Monday I was at the Delaware filming. There's some historical buildings there, filming the place where he crossed the Delaware. Tuesday I was in the classroom, and I was able to say to the students, I'd like you to see what the Delaware River looked like yesterday. You know, and from that moment on, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, they're just sort of on the edge of their chairs. And I showed it, and it's not too often students just clap in the middle of a lecture, but they were so excited. And, you know, often in teaching, you have a lesson plan, an idea, and you begin to visualize the excitement of the students and so on. And sometimes it falls flat completely, and often maybe it doesn't, it's okay, but it doesn't quite live up to your expectations. This one I was thinking, holy smokes, you know, what have I done here? This is much more than I expected. Well, for one thing, I couldn't do the multimedia in the classroom without the enhanced classrooms. And it's wonderful the way, you know, in the old days, there were just a few enhanced classrooms and they're big lecture halls. It's wonderful the way you can go into a classroom with just, you know, seating for 10 or 15 students, and you have the capability of hooking up your computer. So that would be one place where the campus has made, you know, Eastern's investment in this has made a huge difference. I'm also actually currently working on trying to upgrade my understanding of Blackboard and my use of Blackboard. And I had used it in the past mainly for course announcements, which is useful, a kind of commonplace for it. But I noticed this last quarter that I had more students either failing the class or doing poorly than I'd like. I tell the students at the beginning, you do your work, and I want you to get a 3-point out of this. And there are just a few more 1.5s and 2.5s and a few little scattering of 0.0s than I'd like to see. And I'd never used the grade book in Blackboard. But sometimes you have to identify a need before you use the technology that's there. And I'm getting a lot of help from you guys on campus to figure out how to do the grade book and things like that. And the multifaceted grade book where one kind of assignment counts for some amount of points and others for other. And I'm very excited about the possibility of using that to show students where they are. And the point, you know, about students not doing too well is I think part of it might be that in the 3rd and 4th week, they may be doing worse than they think they are. And I've been just practicing with a hypothetical enrolled student named Bob, and giving Bob different grades and seeing how it affects the overall grade as a whole. And I can see that would be very useful. I mean, I see putting it through the big projector, and Bob's not going to be embarrassed because he's a hypothetical imaginary student, but I'm going to say, here's Bob on steroids, you know, folks. This is what happens if he does 10 hours homework, does well on his quizzes. This is what happens if he misses 3 classes, and I'll be able to illustrate it. So not only am I appreciating the technology that we have on campus for what I've already used, but I'm very impressed with the continuing areas of growth that are out there. A lot of what I've done in getting films ready, I've done on my own with my Mac and with iMovie and camera and so on. And thank goodness the prices, you know, something that would have been $20,000 just a few years ago is now $500, and 10 years ago or 20 years ago wouldn't have existed at all. So those things are available, and I've bought a pretty nice Pro-Am camera, have my Mac, I have iMovie so I can edit films, things of that sort, and then the film clips that I can take and edit on my own. So part of it is using the campus technology to project something onto the big screen. I'm also, with Blackboard, beginning to start streaming clips. And good case in point, I'm doing a seminar now, a capstone seminar on the history of disease. And one good way to get students thinking about disease in general is through some pretty good films out there on it. Some, you know, you hear somebody's sick and, you know, you never see them. The film doesn't really tell you much. I particularly like a film called Outbreak, which has its corny moments, but also has some historically pretty accurate moments showing you different kinds of technologies and so on, and the way plague spread. And it's a 2-hour film with, it's a great story, and sometimes it wanders, there's a romance in it, and it helps make the film interesting. It doesn't necessarily tell you too much about the disease, except the woman catches it, so I guess that brings you into it. But more importantly, there are clips in there. There's a visit to a laboratory, and the laboratory shows you what's called biosafety levels. And there's certain kinds of diseases where we could just walk in and maybe put a mask on and work with the microbes. And then at various levels you put more and more on. And the highest level is diseases like Ebola, where you have to have this spacesuit basically, where you go into the lab. And in the film there's about a 2-minute where they just they're walking down this corridor, and it just click, 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 biosafety level 1, mentions some diseases, biosafety level 2, and so on. And to tell you how bad it gets, even AIDS is only biosafety level 3. Biosafety level 4 is scary stuff. Well, 2-minute clip, they see it in class, but I now have it on the Blackboard site so they can click on that and review it as many times as they want. Now, honestly, I'm not sure what the underlying technology is I'm using. I think it's something Stream. ShareStream is the particular technology. I'm interested in all of it. I think iTunes U would be a great, it's an area I'd like to develop. In fact, I was sort of a little bit side-railed from my career in technology for a few years, first in faculty government and then as department chair. And I'm glad I did that, and I'm also glad now that I'm back to being able to teach and do research and writing full-time. And I figure I'm going to try to kick it into a higher gear. And as I look at what I can do, and you know, we have an Apple store in Spokane now. I can go in there and get instruction from them, but also on campus. I plan to exploit you guys as much as I can to get some more lessons in how to do this stuff. Because there is so much out there. I mean, I won't say it's going to be quite as complex as getting a PhD in history, but you know, there are higher levels of education in using these things. And I'm very excited about the fact that there's a match here. Just like I was like a kid in the candy store when the Apple store came in because of this training that they offer. And it's a lot harder to get it over in Seattle. Same thing here is I'm finding questions and don't really know how to answer them. To have real human beings makes a huge difference. To be able to sit down with people and talk about these things makes a huge difference. Another of the things where I make a lot of use of technology and love the capabilities out there is there are a number of times, probably 2 hours a day, when I find myself in a position where I could listen to something, but not necessarily be reading a book. And I'm finding ways to digitize books, and then actually from the digitization to get a recording. I mean, it's a computer recording, but they're better and better now. It's not just a robotic sound. And in fact, today, a little bit later on, I'll be teaching a graduate seminar where I will have done my homework by walking around doing dishes and listening to some of the assignment that way. And this is probably 2 hours a day that wasn't dead time at all. There are other things you can do, listen to music, but you know, driving into Spokane or whatever, that's yet another use of technology that I find absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to be actually experimenting with something tonight with my students. I want them to read an account, an autobiography of a woman who was captured by Indians, Puritan woman, back in the 1670s, so well over 300 years ago. And I want them, they haven't had a homework assignment yet, it's their first week in class. They'll be reading, next week they will have read at home, but they don't have anything like that. So I want them to read in class. And often I find when you do that, you have the fast readers that are reading at one speed, and then the slower at another, and there's that kind of awkward period where some people are finished and others not. And I'm actually going to use the recording. This is kind of an experiment, but say, look, I want us to keep it pretty much the same spot in this reading right now, because I'm going to be constantly stopping and talking, and I want it about it, and I want us to have very fresh in our minds just where we've been. So, and I'm kind of experimenting with this and trying it out, but another example of the use of the technology. Now, in general, you know, it's kind of an interesting question. What difference has technology made? Because some of the things I do the same. One of the most effective things, I'm glad to say it's still effective, and you know, they say, oh, you should redo your syllabus, redo your course. If you got something good, go with it and stay with it. And one of the things I did those, not quite 40 years ago when I first arrived, but in the first couple of years, I began role-playing a Puritan minister. And I'd say to the students, you be the congregation, you've done a little reading on this, men on one side of the room, women on the other. That's the way the Puritans did it. We're back in 1650, and I'm going to preach, and then I want you to ask questions in character, as if you were Puritans. And this would be typical of a Puritan sermon, that the preacher would invite you to talk. Well, we do that, and I did it just a couple months ago, and it's always one of the things at the end of the class that they remember best. And the point there is that there are exciting things you can do in the classroom in the way of discussions, lecture, role-playing. Sometimes I deliver Patrick Henry's Liberty or Death speech and so on. As I get older, part of the fun of being a historian is things that I've seen. Like I actually saw and stood close enough to see the sweat on his brow as Martin Luther King spoke at Berkeley in 1968. Well, those things, they are just as engaging as any other kinds of technology. So, but I'm just saying this to underscore my answer to your question, why technology? What does technology add to it? And I would just say that it doubles and triples the wow moments, those moments when students really get it, when they see there's something deep and important in history. It's just a wonderful tool to take them to another level. That I think of in terms particularly of film, but then these many other devices like using Blackboard to stay in closer touch with students, to refine assignments, to answer questions. That's huge. And so it's a whole new realm of learning. And I like the fact that it's not just wiping out the old stuff. You know, it's not as if the old stuff is irrelevant at all. It's that it just is a magnificent accompaniment to what we already have.